Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I have a story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty, and what it really means to live for yourself. Imagine dedicating 50 years of your life, your youth, your savings, your energy, just to make sure your only child has the best future. Now imagine one day realizing that the people you love most don't love you back. They just want what you have. This isn't just a story about a mother and daughter. It's a story about betrayal, sacrifice, and an unforgettable act of revenge that shook an entire family. So, grab a cup of tea, settle in, because what Amanda, our main character, did next will make you rethink how far parents should go for their children. Let's begin. Let me tell you how a simple bottle of wine shattered 50 years of love, sacrifice, and loyalty. A bottle that revealed the ugly truth I had spent my entire life trying to ignore. For years, my husband James and I lived quietly in our daughter Rachel's house. It wasn't how we imagined our retirement would be. We had dreams once, of a small home by the coast, peaceful mornings with coffee, maybe a trip to the countryside now and then. But when Rachel asked us to move in and help her raise our grandson Owen, we said yes without hesitation. Felt natural. After all, she was our only child. We wanted to help, to ease her burden, to be close to family. So we gave up everything. Our home, our privacy, our independence, to make her life easier. We cooked, cleaned, looked after Owen day and night, and barely spent a dime on ourselves. Our retirement income, nearly $7,000 a month, went straight into household expenses. We thought we were doing what good parents should do. We never asked for anything in return. Until that one night. It was our wedding anniversary. 50 years of marriage. 50 years of struggles, love, and sacrifices. James had always had a soft spot for small batch red wine, the kind with elegant vintage labels. So when I saw a bottle on sale at the grocery store, just $30, I slipped it quietly into the basket. I wanted to surprise him, to remind us both that despite everything, we were still two people who loved each other. That evening after dinner, James pulled out the bottle, a shy smile on his face. "Shall we?" he asked. Just as he was about to uncork it, the front door burst open. David, our son-in-law, stormed into the room, the sharp smell of alcohol clinging to him like a second skin. His eyes locked onto the bottle on the table. "You bought this," he snapped, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. James glanced at me, then forced a smile. "It's been a while since we've had a drink together. We thought." Before he could finish, David exploded. "Do you know how much gas I could have bought with that money? That bottle could fill up an entire tank." His voice grew louder, angrier with every word. "I've said it over and over. Cut back on spending. But you two throw money around like it grows on trees." I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, my stomach twisting. And then Rachel walked in, her face pinched with irritation. "Mom, why didn't you talk to me first?" she scolded. "You know how tight things are right now. Owen's about to start school, David's project is underfunded. We're stretched thin, and you're wasting money on wine." I looked at them, standing there, scolding us like misbehaving children. And in that moment something inside me cracked. I took a deep breath and pointed at David's wristwatch, the one he proudly flaunted every day. "How much did that cost, David?" I asked, my voice trembling but sharp. He hesitated, then mumbled, "It's for work. I need to look professional." "And your purse, Rachel?" I turned to my daughter, my own daughter, who couldn't even hide the irritation in her eyes. "That designer handbag you love showing off. How much was that?" She crossed her arms, unapologetic. "I need to look good at the office. People judge." My hands shook with rage. "We get nearly $7,000 in retirement every month. And yet, you two stand here telling us we can't enjoy a bottle of wine. You say you're saving money, but you're not saving for us. You're saving for yourselves. You're cutting corners on our happiness, our dignity." The room fell silent for a moment. Owen's little voice broke through the tension as he began to cry, frightened by the shouting. James reached for him, whispering, "Please, let's not fight. It's just a bottle of wine." "I'll return it tomorrow." But I stood firm. I met Rachel and David's eyes and said, "No, I won't apologize for living my life. I earned that wine. If you want money, go earn it yourselves." Then I took James by the hand and walked away, leaving the bottle of wine untouched on the table, like a symbol of everything we had lost, and everything we were about to take back. The morning after that disastrous fight over the bottle of wine, Rachel and David came knocking at our bedroom door. Their smiles were tight, forced, like brittle masks barely holding together. "Mom, Dad," Rachel said sweetly, her voice laced with guilt. "Why don't we all go out today? Get some fresh air. Maybe do a little shopping?" James, ever the peacemaker, gave me a hopeful glance. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted to believe they were trying to make things right. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. We didn't plan on buying anything. We just wandered the streets, letting the cool morning breeze soften the tension lingering between us. But then, as we passed a little vintage boutique downtown, something caught my eye. There, in the display window, was a white dress with delicate blue floral patterns. It wasn't flashy or expensive looking, but it was beautiful. It reminded me of a time long ago, when I used to love dressing up for no one but myself. I stopped in front of the window, unable to look away. James noticed immediately and gave a quiet chuckle. "You like it?" he said, more statement than question. I nodded without meaning to, and before I knew it, he was holding the door open for me. Inside, the shop smelled of soft fabric and lavender. Dresses lined the racks, each one stitched with care and elegance. But my eyes kept drifting back to the one in the window. The store clerk noticed and approached with a warm smile. "Would you like to try it on?" I hesitated. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror. The wrinkles, the short, practical haircut I'd kept for years, the simple, dull clothes I always wore. What was I thinking? I was 65 years old. Who was I trying to impress? But before I could say no, James gently nudged me forward. "You used to love dresses like this," he whispered. "Why shouldn't you now?" The clerk added with a kind smile. "Every age has its own beauty. You'd look stunning in it." So I took a deep breath and followed her to the fitting room. When I stepped out wearing that dress, something shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a tired grandmother or a burden living under someone else's roof. Felt like me, Amanda, a woman who once laughed easily, who once took pride in how she carried herself. James's eyes lit up when he saw me. "You look beautiful," he said softly, and I believed him. I was about to pull out my card and buy the dress when the door chimed behind us. Rachel and David appeared, arms full of high-end shopping bags. Rachel's eyes landed on me, and for a moment her face froze. Then she walked over, her smile thin and sharp. "Mom, at your age. Is this really appropriate?" she asked, her voice syrupy but cutting. "That style is a bit much, don't you think?" David snorted, glancing at the price tag. "Honestly, buying a dress like this is just a waste. You'd get more value buying me a bottle of good whiskey." I felt something inside me wilt. James tried to defend me, his voice tight. "Is it really the style you have a problem with? Or the price?" Rachel laughed, tucking her designer bags behind her back like a guilty child. "Come on, Mom. You're always cooking, cleaning, chasing after Owen. How's a dress like that practical? You're 65. Comfort is what matters." Her words sliced straight through me. She didn't see her mother standing in front of her. She saw a servant, a tired, old woman who didn't deserve beauty or joy. The clerk tried to smooth things over, complimenting how the dress looked on me, but the damage was done. The spark I'd seen in my reflection just minutes ago vanished. Without a word, I returned to the fitting room and changed back into my dull gray clothes, the ones Rachel always called appropriate. When I came out, James silently handed over our savings card to the clerk. "We'll take the dress," he said quietly. "And please pick out a few more in her size. We'll take them all." Rachel and David's faces changed instantly, their smiles gone. We walked out of that shop without looking back, but I couldn't shake the hollow feeling inside me. It wasn't about the dress. It wasn't about the money. It was the moment I realized. To them, even my happiness was considered wasteful. That evening, the house was strangely quiet. The usual tension had faded into an awkward politeness after our shopping trip. Rachel and David had gone out again for one of their social dinners, and it was just me, James, and little Owen sitting at the dining table. I watched James push the food around his plate, barely eating. I knew what he was thinking. He was still hurt by what happened at the boutique, still trying to swallow the bitter taste of our daughter's careless words. Owen sat at the corner, his eyes glued to the cartoons playing in the living room, mindlessly chewing on his dinner. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that made the entire world tilt beneath me. "Grandma," he chirped, "are you really moving out soon?" The words caught me off guard. I blinked at him. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Owen grinned, swinging his little legs under the table. "Dad said that when you and Grandpa leave, we're going to get a new, bigger house. And Grandpa Jay and Grandma Anna can come live here. Isn't that cool?" My heart stopped. My hands froze midair, fork hovering over my plate. I glanced at James. He looked just as stunned as I was. "What new house?" I asked gently, forcing my voice to stay calm. Owen, without hesitation, continued, cheerful and oblivious to the chill creeping into my chest. "Mom and Dad said they'll sell your old house back in your hometown. They'll use the money to buy a house near my new school. And when you're gone, Grandpa Jay and Grandma Anna can move in here with me." His innocent smile was like a dagger straight to my heart. That's when it all made sense. All the lectures about saving money. All the guilt they threw at us over a bottle of wine. The shopping trips, the apologies, it was never about us. It was about the house. About our savings. About how we fit into their financial plans. To them, we were never family. We were a retirement fund. I excused myself from the table, my appetite completely gone. James followed me into the bedroom without a word. For hours we sat there in silence. I lay on my side, staring at the ceiling, the ache in my chest spreading deeper and deeper. All those years we thought we were helping. We thought we were building a future together, one family, one home. But we were nothing more than an asset to be liquidated when the time was right. At midnight, still unable to sleep, I turned to James. His eyes were wide open, staring into the darkness. "James," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Do you remember what we used to talk about before retirement? The plans we made, the life we dreamed of?" He nodded faintly, not trusting himself to speak. I reached out and brushed my fingers gently through the silver strands at his temple. Then I leaned closer and whispered, "It's time." He looked at me, confused. I took his hand in mine and said, steady and soft, "We've given enough. It's time to take back what's ours." For a long moment James said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, the decision already made in my heart. Because sometimes the greatest betrayal isn't from strangers. It's when the people you love most reduce you to nothing more than a means to an end. And I wasn't going to let them strip us of our dignity anymore. The next morning I played my part like nothing had changed. I smiled politely, made Owen's breakfast, folded the laundry, acted as if my heart hadn't shattered the night before. But inside I was sharper than I had been in years. I was done waiting for their kindness. I had a plan now. A few days later, when I casually mentioned that James and I needed to handle some paperwork related to our old house, Rachel's eyes lit up like a child on Christmas morning. "That's great," she exclaimed a little too eagerly. "You should go back and see the property yourself. It's about time we sold that place." David, always quick to move when money was involved, added, "Once it's sold, we can finally buy that new house near Owen's school. It'll change everything." Then, like the greedy businessman he'd always been, he pulled a small bank card from his wallet and handed it to me. "Here," he said smoothly. "When the payment comes through, just transfer it to this account. It'll go toward the new house." I took the card without a word, slipping it into my purse as if I hadn't already decided what I was going to do with it. They didn't even bother asking what would happen to us once the house was sold. They didn't care. They assumed we would keep playing the role we always had. Quiet, obedient, useful. But they didn't realize that Amanda and James were about to disappear. The day of our flight arrived. Rachel hugged us at the airport, all smiles and false affection, reminding us again and again to handle everything quickly so they could move forward with their plans. David reminded me about the bank card 3 separate times before we boarded. And when we finally walked toward security with no one watching, I took that card out of my purse and dropped it straight into the trash bin without a second thought. I didn't even hesitate. On the plane, James sat quietly beside me, his hand resting over mine. Neither of us spoke, but there was a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. For the first time in a long while, we weren't passengers in someone else's life. We were back in control. When we arrived in our hometown, everything moved quickly. The old house hadn't been lived in for years. It was falling apart, but the land still had value. Within days, we found a buyer, finalized the sale, and handled the paperwork ourselves. No one else needed to know. Then, quietly, we went to the bank. We opened a brand new account under our names only. We rerouted all of our retirement payments there and made sure Rachel and David could never touch our money again. We transferred what little was left in the joint account Rachel had been controlling. It wasn't much, after years of being drained, but it was ours. We cleared out the house, packed only what we needed, left behind everything else. Old furniture, photos, memories of a life we thought we were building for family. All abandoned like the people who had discarded us. 2 weeks later, while Rachel and David were busy planning their dream home, still believing the money would magically appear in their account, James and I were sitting on the porch of a small cottage by the sea. The sun was warm. The breeze smelled like salt and freedom. And for the first time in 50 years, we belonged to no one but ourselves. We had vanished from their lives. And we weren't coming back. The cottage wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. Just 2 small bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a porch that opened out to the sound of the sea. But to us, it felt like a palace. For the first time in years, there was no tension in the air, no sharp glances, no footsteps at night outside our door. Just the sound of the waves, the rustling of the trees, and the soft hum of life slowing down. James and I spent our mornings walking by the lake, our afternoons browsing the farmer's market, picking out fresh vegetables and small treats we would have once felt guilty buying. We laughed over coffee, sat in silence watching sunsets, and for the first time in a long while, slept without fear or heaviness pressing on our chests. I let my hair grow out again. I started wearing the dresses I used to love, the ones I had buried at the back of the closet, believing I didn't deserve them anymore. Every day felt like breathing after years of drowning. It had been almost 3 weeks when James's phone finally rang. The screen flashed with Rachel's name. He looked at me, question in his eyes. He nodded. He answered, putting the phone on speaker. Her voice burst through immediately. Loud, frantic, sharp. "Dad, where have you been? It's been weeks. The house, is it sold? When are you transferring the money? The agent said the buyer's ready. We're about to lose the new place we picked." James said nothing. He just let her words spill out like a broken faucet. Then, when she finally stopped for breath, he spoke calmly, almost gently. "Rachel, your mother and I decided to take a little trip." There was a pause on the other end. Then her voice shot up an octave. "A trip? What do you mean? When are you coming back?" "The money." James cut her off, voice still soft but firm. "We're not coming back." Silence. For a moment, the line was dead, like the words hadn't registered. Then came the sound of her voice breaking apart, sharp, shrill. "What do you mean you're not coming back? What about the house? What about the money? We've already put down an offer." I reached over and took the phone from James. My voice was calm, steady, like a steel thread beneath silk. "Rachel," I said, "the house is sold. The money is ours. We've changed our retirement account. You won't see another penny from us." Her gasp on the other end was sharp, like she'd been slapped. "You can't do this," she screamed. "We're counting on that money." How are we supposed to buy the new house? How can you just leave us like this? I took a deep breath and answered, every word clear as glass. Because we finally realized, Rachel. You were never counting on us. You were counting on what we had. You've been planning your future with our sacrifices. But we're done being part of your plan. The line went silent. No more yelling. No more demands. Just quiet. I hung up without another word. James and I sat there for a long time after, the sound of the waves rolling in through the open window. And in that silence, something inside me finally settled. I had spent decades waiting for my daughter to love me the way I had loved her. I had waited for her to see me, not as a burden, not as a wallet, but as her mother. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I leaned back in my chair, let the sun warm my face, and smiled. For the first time in 50 years, I was finally free. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. If you were in Amanda's shoes, after giving everything to your child only to be treated like a burden, what would you do? Would you have the courage to walk away like she did? Or would you stay, hoping they'd change? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to see how you feel about this story so far. Now, let's get back to what Amanda did next, because things are about to get even more unexpected. Life after that phone call was quieter, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of quiet we had craved for years, the kind that didn't come with conditions or expectations. For the first time in half a century, I wasn't anyone's caretaker, anyone's wallet, anyone's obligation. I was just Amanda. And I had no idea how much of myself I had lost until I started to find her again. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Slowly, almost shyly at first, I began to rediscover who I used to be. I let my hair grow out again, brushing the silver strands in front of the mirror each morning. I stopped wearing the dull, shapeless clothes Rachel had called practical and pulled out the vintage dresses I had buried years ago, the ones with soft fabrics and delicate prints that made me feel light, feminine, and alive. James noticed first. One morning, when I stepped out in a blue floral dress with my hair pinned up, he smiled at me like he hadn't in years. There she is, he whispered. The woman I fell in love with. We spent our days walking by the lake, visiting the farmer's market, learning to cook new recipes, even biking along the coast. People in town began to recognize us. The sweet older couple who always smiled, always strolled hand in hand, always looked like they were quietly in love with life. It didn't take long before we became something of a local curiosity. But then, one afternoon, everything changed again. We were sitting at our usual cafe, James reading the newspaper and me sipping tea, when a young man approached our table. He was tall, lean, with a camera slung casually around his neck and an energy in his eyes that reminded me of someone who hadn't yet been crushed by the weight of the world. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but eager. "I've seen you two around. I hope this isn't too forward, but you have such an interesting aura about you. May I sit?" His name was Chris, a content creator as he called himself, a storyteller with a camera. He asked about our lives, about how we ended up here, about why we always look so peaceful. I don't know why, but I told him the truth. Not every dark detail, but enough for him to understand. That we had spent our lives giving until there was nothing left. That one day we decided to stop giving and start living. Chris listened quietly, nodding now and then, his eyes soft but burning with curiosity. By the time we finished our tea, he asked if he could film us. Not for money, not for fame, just to share a glimpse of what life could look like when you chose yourself. I laughed at first, but James squeezed my hand. "Why not?" he said. "We've got nothing to hide." A week later, the first video went up. It was simple. Just clips of us walking along the lake, James adjusting my sun hat, me laughing at something silly he said, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. And then, something unexpected happened. The video exploded. People from everywhere started commenting. Strangers saying they wished they could find what we had, others saying they hadn't seen real love like that in years. Some said they cried watching how we looked at each other. Overnight, we became the couple who walked away. Symbols of something people didn't know they were searching for. And while the world buzzed around us, James and I sat in our little cottage by the sea, smiling at how strange life could be. We had vanished, but somehow we had never been more seen. 6 months passed like a dream. James and I had settled into a rhythm. Quiet mornings by the lake, afternoons spent tending the little garden behind our cottage, evenings filled with soft music and warm tea. The world outside no longer had power over us. For the first time, our life was entirely our own. Until the day Rachel and David showed up at our door. It was a cold afternoon. James and I were getting ready to head to the farmer's market when we heard the knock. Sharp, hurried, impatient. When I opened the door, there they were. Rachel looked thinner, her face tight with stress, eyes wild like a cornered animal. David stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Before I could even greet them, Rachel's voice spilled out in a rush. "Mom, Dad, we've been looking everywhere for you. You just disappeared. We went back to the old house, it's sold. The money, the account, everything's gone. What's going on?" I said nothing. I simply stepped aside and let them in. They didn't waste time pretending. As soon as they sat down, Rachel leaned forward, her voice laced with urgency. "We found a new house," she said. "It's not as nice as the one we wanted before, but it'll do. If we move quickly, we can still get it. But we need the money." David nodded, his face hard. "We thought you'd come to your senses by now." I stared at them, quiet, letting their words hang in the air. Then I spoke, voice even and cool. "Live within your means. We're done." Rachel blinked, as if she hadn't heard me properly. "What do you mean, done?" I stood, folding my hands calmly in front of me. "You've spent your entire life expecting us to make sacrifices so you could live comfortably. But we're finished being part of your plans. We don't owe you anything." David's face darkened. "So that's it. You're cutting us off. For what, for this?" He gestured wildly around the small but cozy cottage. "For this ridiculous little life." Before I could reply, the front gate creaked open. Chris appeared, a bright smile on his face, camera slung over his shoulder as always. He paused when he saw our visitors. "Oh," he said casually. "You must be Rachel and David." David's eyes narrowed instantly, and I could see the venom in his gaze before he even spoke. "So this is why you left us," he sneered, rising to his feet. "This little leech. He's got you wrapped around his finger, doesn't he? Pretending to care about you, but really just after your money." Chris blinked, confused, then glanced at me. "What's he talking about?" David didn't wait for an answer. He charged at Chris, finger jabbing furiously in the air. "You think you're clever, charming two old fools so you can cash in when they die. I see right through you." What happened next took everyone by surprise. In one smooth, effortless motion, Chris sidestepped, grabbed David's arm, and flipped him clean over onto the ground. David landed hard, groaning, completely stunned. James let out a loud laugh from the kitchen. I couldn't help but smile. Chris dusted off his hands, looking down at David with a shake of his head. "Seriously," he muttered. "That's all you've got?" Rachel's face turned bright red, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to scream but couldn't find the words. David struggled to his feet, humiliated beyond words, and without another glance at us, stormed out the door. Rachel lingered a moment longer, her eyes pleading, her lips trembling like she wanted to say something. Anything that might fix the damage. But I simply walked to the door and opened it wider. "You should go," I said quietly. "There's nothing left for you here." She stared at me for a long second, then turned and followed David down the path. James came to stand beside me as we watched them disappear. He reached for my hand, gave it a soft squeeze and whispered, "You did the right thing." And as the door clicked shut behind them, I realized something deep inside me had finally settled. For the first time in my life I had said no. And I meant it. Not long after Rachel and David's humiliating departure, something unexpected happened. Something I never could have imagined when I first walked away from that old life. It all started with Chris. One morning, as James and I sat on the porch sipping tea, Chris arrived with a spark in his eyes and a wide grin on his face. "I want to introduce you to someone," he said, almost bouncing with excitement. "She's been asking to meet you ever since I posted that video." He didn't tell us who. A week later, we found ourselves standing outside a sleek, modern building in a coastal city. When Chris opened the door and ushered us inside, I froze. There, waiting in the airy, sunlit studio, was Claire Stone, a name I had whispered to myself years ago while watching late-night fashion shows on an old television. A legend in the world of vintage couture. The woman who had once made me fall in love with floral prints and delicate lace when I was young and dreaming. Claire stood tall, elegant, her silver hair swept into a neat chignon, her eyes sharp but kind. "Amanda," she greeted me like an old friend. "I've been waiting to meet you." I barely managed a polite smile, unsure why a woman like her would care about someone like me. Then she led me to the center of the studio, where a mannequin stood draped in fabric, the most exquisite vintage dress I'd ever seen. Layers of silk and lace, hand-embroidered flowers cascading down the hem like a garden in bloom. "This," she said, lifting the cloth gently, "is my masterpiece. But I've never found the right person to wear it. Until I saw you." I laughed awkwardly, shaking my head. "Surely you're mistaken. I'm 65. I haven't worn anything this beautiful in decades." But Claire smiled, eyes twinkling. "That's exactly why you're perfect. Style isn't about age. It's about spirit." Before I knew it, she was inviting me to walk in her upcoming runway show. Thought she was joking. James thought she was serious. And within days, I found myself in her studio every morning, learning how to walk again. Not just across the runway, but tall, proud, confident. For weeks I trained. I practiced holding my head high, learned to move with grace instead of shrinking into the background like I had for years. I learned how to stand in front of the world without apology. James was there for every rehearsal. He watched from the sidelines, his eyes never leaving me. Every time I stumbled, he caught me. Every time I doubted, he reminded me why I started. Then the night of the show arrived. Backstage, the air buzzed with nerves and electricity. Young models checked their makeup. Assistants rushed around frantically, but I stood still, calm, dressed in Claire's masterpiece. When I stepped onto that runway, the crowd fell silent. The lights hit me. The cameras flashed. But I wasn't afraid. I walked, every step steady, every movement deliberate. I wasn't just wearing a dress. I was wearing every sacrifice I had ever made, every piece of myself I had almost forgotten, every part of me I had reclaimed. When I reached the end of the runway, I glanced toward the front row. James was there. And the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing in the universe, made my heart flutter like a young girl again. The applause erupted. Not polite, not obligatory, but thunderous, raw, real. The next morning my face was everywhere. Social media, news headlines, fashion blogs. They called me the vintage goddess. But it wasn't just me who caught the world's attention. A single photo spread faster than anything else. James sitting in the front row, eyes shining, looking at me like I was magic. People called it the picture of true love. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a mother who had been used up and discarded. It felt like Amanda again. Alive, beautiful, free. It had been months since the night I walked the runway and earned the title, the vintage goddess. Life had finally settled into something soft and beautiful. James and I traveled more, laughed more, lived more. The noise of the past had faded into the distance like an old, bitter song we no longer listen to. But the past, I learned, has a way of showing up when you least expect it. It happened on an autumn evening, backstage at another fashion show. I had just stepped off the runway, still catching my breath, when I heard the commotion near the entrance. A woman's voice. Broken, desperate. Turned, and there she was. Rachel. But she wasn't the polished, sharp-tongued woman I had known. She was thinner, gaunt even, her hair tangled, eyes hollow. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks, like the weight of the world was crushing her from every side. And beside her, clutching her hand, was Owen. The moment she saw me, Rachel ran forward and dropped to her knees right there on the cold marble floor. "Mom, please," she choked out. I've got nowhere else to go. I stood frozen, unable to speak. Owen hid behind her, face pale, eyes filled with confusion and sadness. Security hesitated, unsure if they should intervene. James appeared beside me, his hand resting gently on my arm, but he said nothing. Rachel's words spilled out in a torrent. "David's gone," she said. "He's been arrested for fraud, bribery, corruption. 8 years in prison. The house is gone. The bank's coming after me. There's nothing left." Her voice cracked as she clutched Owen's small shoulders, pulling him forward. "Please, Mom, take us in. For Owen, if not for me. He needs you." I looked down at her. My daughter, who had once reduced me to nothing but a source of money, who had discarded me without a second thought when she thought I had nothing left to give. And now, here she was at my feet. But I wasn't the woman I used to be. I knelt down slowly so I could look her in the eye. "Rachel," I said quietly but firmly, "you never wanted us. You only wanted what we had." Tears welled in her eyes. "That's not true." But I shook my head. "You wanted our house, our money, our time. But never our hearts. You didn't want parents. You wanted an inheritance." She flinched like I had struck her. I looked at Owen then. Poor, sweet Owen, caught in the storm of his parents' greed and recklessness. "He is your son," I said. "It's your job to take care of him now." Rachel's shoulders shook, and she began to cry quietly. Her head bowed so low it almost touched the floor. James stepped forward, his voice gentle but final. "You made your choices, Rachel. And so did we. We're done." Security finally stepped in, ushering them out quietly, gently. As they disappeared through the doors, I felt nothing but a deep, cold sadness. Not anger, not hatred. Just the weight of knowing that sometimes, love isn't enough to fix what's broken. I turned to James, and he took my hand without a word. We had finally closed the chapter, and there was no going back. In the weeks that followed Rachel's public breakdown at the fashion show, the internet erupted. At first, it was curiosity. Whispers and murmurs about the woman who had walked away from her family, the same woman who had stunned the world on the runway at 65. But soon, curiosity turned to criticism. The headlines grew sharper, uglier. "Heartless mother abandons her only daughter." "Selfish parents choose freedom over family." Comment sections filled with strangers calling me cruel, cold, ungrateful. They said I had forgotten what it meant to be a mother, that I had thrown my daughter away the moment she became inconvenient. They didn't know the truth. No one knew what lay beneath the headlines. For a while I stayed silent. I let them talk, let the public paint me as the villain. After all, I'd lived long enough to know how easily people believe what they want to believe. But then, one evening, sitting by the window of our little cottage with the sea breeze brushing against my face, I realized something. Their voices weren't just about me. They were about every parent who had been drained, dismissed, discarded. Every mother and father who had been used. Their love taken for granted until there was nothing left but empty hands and tired hearts. So I sat down at my desk and wrote. I wrote the truth. I wrote about the 5 years James and I spent living in our daughter's house, working without pay, cooking, cleaning, raising our grandson, never daring to spend a dollar on ourselves. I wrote about how our retirement income disappeared month after month, used to pay their bills, fund their lifestyle, buy their designer watches and handbags, while we were scolded for buying a single bottle of wine on our wedding anniversary. I wrote about the day I realized we were no longer family, but a financial asset waiting to be cashed in. I wrote about how we walked away, not out of cruelty, but because we finally understood that love without respect isn't love at all. And when I was done, I published it. The article spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the conversation shifted. Older readers, quiet voices who had stayed silent for years, began to speak up. They talked about the sacrifices they had made, the way their adult children treated them like unpaid babysitters, caretakers, checkbooks. They talked about how no one asked if they were tired. No one wondered what they had given up. And slowly, the tide began to turn. It wasn't about a bottle of wine anymore. It was about how easy it is to expect parents to give and give and give, until there's nothing left of them. One comment beneath the article stayed with me the most. It read, "They didn't abandon anyone. They simply stopped abandoning themselves." That night, I closed my laptop, walked outside to where James sat under the stars, and slipped my hand into his. We were older now. Our bodies slower, our faces marked with years. But our hearts had never felt lighter. We kept traveling after that. Small towns, quiet harbors, winding roads that took us far away from everything we used to be. And everywhere we went, people would recognize me. Some called me the vintage goddess. Others called me selfish. But I didn't care, because I knew the truth. And if anyone asked, I told them, we're not selfish. We're finally living the life we've earned. And that, too, is love. And that's the end of Amanda's story. A story that reminds us that sometimes, the hardest but bravest thing you can do is to choose yourself. To stop giving to people who only take, and finally live the life you deserve. The lesson here isn't about revenge. It's about knowing your worth, about understanding that love is not measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how much you respect yourself. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. I hope this story touched you in some way. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What did you feel after listening to Amanda's journey? Did it change the way you see family, love, or even yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next unforgettable story. Until next time, stay kind and take care of yourself.